The cold equations. The crystalline spires of research station Helios caught the light of 3 distant suns, casting prismatic shadows across its sterile corridors. Dr. Naira Valthor stood motionless before the quantum observation chamber, her iridescent scales reflecting soft blues and purples in the artificial light. As the station's lead researcher in theoretical physics, she took pride in the absolute precision of her work, and the complete absence of emotional contamination that her species, the Centaurians, were known for. Station alert, incoming emergency transport. Human rescue specialist en route. Docking in 15 minutes. Naira's secondary eyelids flickered in irritation. The station's recent gravimetric anomalies were concerning, yes, but hardly warranted outside intervention, especially not from a human. She'd analyzed the data herself. The fluctuations were well within acceptable parameters. The docking bay doors hissed open precisely 14 minutes and 37 seconds later. James Harrison stepped out, his emergency response suit bearing the scars of countless missions. His dark skin was damp with sweat, and his close-cropped hair showed hints of gray at the temples. He carried a heavy equipment case in one hand and a datapad in the other. Dr. Valthor. He extended his hand, then awkwardly withdrew it when she made no move to reciprocate. Right, sorry. Different customs. I'm James Harrison, Emergency Response Division. We received your station's automated distress signal. There has been no distress signal, Naira stated flatly, her multifaceted eyes scanning him with clinical detachment. The station's systems are functioning within normal parameters. James frowned, bringing up a holographic display from his datapad. According to these readings, you've got significant quantum instabilities building up in your core. The pattern suggests a cascade failure within the next 72 hours. Impossible. I personally calibrated the quantum matrix this morning. Naira moved to a nearby console, her long fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Your human instruments must be, she stopped, her scales shifting to a pale lavender of surprise. The readings were there, hidden beneath layers of normal operations data. Subtle. Insidious. Growing. Sometimes we can't see what's right in front of us, James said quietly. Especially when we're too close to it. Naira's head crest flattened in annoyance. Spare me your human metaphors, Mr. Harrison. If there is indeed a problem, I am perfectly capable of resolving it without emotional platitudes. James, he corrected with a slight smile. And I'm sure you are. But Station Protocol 7249 requires outside verification for any Level 2 quantum anomaly. So you're stuck with me until we sort this out. Over the next several hours, they worked in tense silence. Naira refused to acknowledge James's presence more than absolutely necessary, but she couldn't help noticing things. The way he approached each task with methodical care. How he double-checked his calculations without being asked. The respect he showed for her equipment, despite his obvious unfamiliarity with some of the more advanced Centaurian technology. These patterns, he said eventually, breaking the silence. They're not random, are they? Naira looked up from her calculations. Explain. James projected a three-dimensional model of the quantum fluctuations. See here, and here. There's a rhythm to it. Almost like a pulse, Naira finished, her scales shifting to deep indigo with intellectual excitement before she could suppress the reaction. The station's quantum core is resonating with something. But what could cause that kind of quantum resonance? James asked, running a hand through his hair in frustration. There's nothing out there except the void between realities, Naira whispered, her professional detachment cracking for just a moment. The station's position was chosen specifically because it lies at a weak point between dimensions. We've been studying the membrane between universes, trying to understand the fundamental nature of reality itself. James stared at her, then at the swirling pattern of quantum disturbances. You're telling me something is knocking on the door between universes? And your station is answering? That is an imprecise and overly dramatic way of putting it, but, essentially correct. Naira found herself oddly appreciating his ability to grasp complex concepts and reduce them to simple metaphors, even if she would never admit it. Well, James said with a grim smile, I guess that's why they sent me. I specialize in impossible situations. He looked at her directly, his dark eyes intense. The question is, Dr. Valthor, are you willing to work with a human to save your station? Naira studied him for a long moment, her logical mind warring with something else, something she wasn't ready to name. I am willing to work with competence, regardless of its origin, she finally said. James's smile widened slightly. Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment. Calculated risks. The quantum core chamber pulsed with an eerie blue light, its rhythmic fluctuations growing stronger by the hour. Naira stood before the main control panel, her scales now a deep shade of concentration as she input complex equations into the system. James watched from nearby, noting how the light played across her iridescent features. The resonance is increasing exponentially, she announced, her voice tight with what might have been concern, if Centaurians admitted to such emotions. Our containment fields are operating at maximum capacity, but they won't hold indefinitely. James stepped closer, examining the readouts. How long? 48 hours, 17 minutes at current degradation rates. Naira's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a tell James was beginning to recognize as agitation. Though I suspect that estimate may be optimistic. Then we need to evacuate the station, James said firmly. Unacceptable. Naira's head crest rose sharply. This facility contains decades of research. The combined knowledge of hundreds of Centaurian scientists. We cannot simply abandon it. Knowledge can be replaced. Lives can't. James moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel the slight temperature difference that Centaurians naturally maintained. Trust me, I've learned that lesson the hard way. Naira turned to face him, her multifaceted eyes searching his face. You speak from experience. Space Station Darwin, 3 years ago. James's voice grew quiet. We tried to save the research. Waited too long to evacuate. Lost 27 people. I read about that incident, Naira admitted. The official report praised your efforts in saving the remaining crew. The report left out the nightmares. James met her gaze steadily. I'm not letting that happen again. Not here. Something shifted in Naira's expression, subtle, but present. Perhaps, there is a compromise. The quantum core's resonance appears to be tied to specific dimensional frequencies. If we could modify the containment field to dampen those frequencies, we might be able to buy more time, James finished, already pulling up the station's structural schematics. But we'd need to adjust the field generators manually. The automated systems can't handle that kind of precise calibration. The radiation levels near the generators are significantly above human tolerance, Naira pointed out. But within Centaurian limits? James asked. Naira's scales shifted to a pale green, uncertainty, James guessed. Yes, but the procedure would require 2 people. One to modify the generators, one to monitor and adjust the quantum harmonics from the main control room. Sounds like we make a good team then. James offered a slight smile. We are not a team, Naira corrected automatically, but her tone lacked its usual edge. We are 2 specialists addressing a critical situation with the most logical solution available. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Doctor. They spent the next several hours preparing for the procedure. James was impressed despite himself at Naira's attention to detail, the way she anticipated potential problems and developed contingencies. She, in turn, found herself repeatedly surprised by his intuitive grasp of complex quantum mechanics. Your understanding of multidimensional physics is unexpected, she commented as they ran through the final checks. Had a lot of time to study between emergencies, James replied. Besides, someone once told me that understanding the universe is the first step to saving it. A surprisingly profound statement for a human. We have our moments. James finished checking his monitoring equipment. Ready? Naira paused at the entrance to the generator chamber, her scales rippling with subtle colors. Mr. Harrison. James. If this does not work. It'll work. He met her gaze firmly. Because you're brilliant, and I'm stubborn, and together we're going to save your station. For the first time since they'd met, Naira's scales flushed with a color James hadn't seen before, a soft, rosy pink that faded almost instantly. That is not a logical argument. No, James agreed with a smile. It's faith. The generator chamber door sealed behind Naira with a heavy thud. James took his position at the main console, establishing a direct communication link. Clear channel. How's it looking in there? The radiation levels are within acceptable parameters, Naira's voice came through clearly. Beginning primary sequence now. As they worked, something shifted between them. Each anticipating the other's needs, moving in perfect synchronization despite being separated by meters of reinforced shielding. It was like a dance, James thought, one where both partners knew the steps by heart. Generator 1 recalibrated, Naira reported. Moving to, her voice cut off in a sharp intake of breath. Naira? James straightened, alarm shooting through him. What's wrong? The resonance, it's changing. I'm seeing patterns I don't. A sudden surge of energy rippled through the station, causing the lights to flicker. James, these readings. I don't think we're dealing with a natural phenomenon anymore. What do you mean? I mean, Naira's voice was tight with what could only be described as fear, something on the other side is trying to break through. And I think it just noticed us. Quantum entanglement. The station's warning klaxons blared as reality itself seemed to shudder. James watched in horror as fractal patterns of light began spreading across the quantum core chamber's walls, like cracks in the fabric of spacetime. Naira, get out of there now, he shouted into the comm. Negative. Her voice was steady despite the chaos. If I leave now, the containment field will collapse completely. The dimensional breach will, static interrupted her words. James slammed his fist on the console. We don't have time to argue. The radiation levels are spiking. Then help me instead of arguing, Naira snapped back. I need you to modulate the quantum harmonics. Match them to the breach frequency. That's insane. We'll be giving it exactly what it wants. Trust me. Something in her voice made James pause. Please. His hands moved across the controls before his mind fully processed the decision. Setting quantum harmonics to match breach frequency. Just, be careful. Inside the generator chamber, Naira worked with desperate precision. Her scales had shifted to a deep violet, a color of complete focus among her people. The fractal patterns were everywhere now, beautiful and terrifying in their complexity. Through them, she could almost see something. Shapes that shouldn't exist. Mathematics made manifest. James, she said softly, if this doesn't work. It'll work, he interrupted. Remember? Brilliant and stubborn. A small sound escaped her that might have been a laugh. You humans and your irrational optimism. The patterns were shifting faster now, forming impossible geometries. Naira's hands flew across the generator controls, making microscopic adjustments. She could feel the other side pressing against reality, searching for a way through. But there was something else too, a pattern within the pattern. James, are you seeing this? Her voice was filled with wonder. The quantum signatures, they're not random. They're not attacking. They're communicating, James finished, staring at his own readings. But what are they trying to say? Naira's scientific mind raced. The patterns, they remind me of neural networks. Like a vast, multidimensional consciousness trying to reach across the void. Can we respond? Theoretically, if we reverse the quantum polarity and create a controlled feedback loop. She paused. But it would require perfect synchronization between us. One mistake and the breach could tear the station apart. James didn't hesitate. Tell me what you need me to do. Together, they began the delicate process of establishing contact. James monitoring the quantum harmonics, making split-second adjustments based on Naira's readings. Naira carefully modulating the energy flow, building a bridge between dimensions one quantum at a time. The fractal patterns began to pulse in rhythm with their efforts. Colors that had no names in any human or Centaurian language swirled through the chamber. And then, suddenly, there was understanding. They're scientists, Naira breathed. Like us. They've been studying the boundaries between universes, trying to make contact. The resonance we detected, it was their equivalent of a greeting. All this time, they were just trying to say hello. James couldn't help but laugh. Talk about cultural misunderstandings. The concept of hello is vastly oversimplified in this context, but essentially correct. Naira's tone held a warmth he'd never heard before. They're offering to share their research, James. Their understanding of quantum mechanics is centuries beyond ours. As they worked to stabilize the connection, James found himself thinking about how far they'd come in just a few days. From cold disdain to this moment of shared discovery. He thought about how Naira's voice changed when she was excited about something, the way her scales shifted colors with her thoughts even when she tried to hide it. James. Naira's voice pulled him from his reverie. Your quantum harmonics are drifting. Sorry, he adjusted quickly. Got distracted thinking about neural networks. There was a pause. You are a poor liar, James Harrison. Yeah, well, not all of us can maintain perfect Centaurian composure. Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps, perfect composure is not always advantageous. Before James could respond, a new set of readings demanded their attention. The dimensional beings were withdrawing, but they'd left something behind. Pages upon pages of quantum equations and theoretical frameworks began filling the station's databases. It's incredible, Naira whispered. Their gift, it could revolutionize our understanding of the universe. Not bad for a day's work, James said. Though I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed we didn't get to do any dramatic last-minute rescues. The day is not over yet, Naira replied, and James could have sworn he heard a smile in her voice. And there are still many mysteries to solve. As the fractal patterns faded and the quantum core stabilized, James found himself wondering about those mysteries. About the space between stars and species. About the things that could grow in that space, if given the chance. Naira? Yes, James. I'm glad they sent me here. This time, the pause was different. Softer somehow. As am I. Theory of everything. In the days that followed first contact, Research Station Helios hummed with newfound energy. The dimensional being's gift had transformed the quantum core chamber into something extraordinary, a bridge between universes, stable but delicate as spider silk. Naira spent countless hours studying the equations they'd left behind, her usual rigid posture softening with wonder as each new discovery unfolded. James found reasons to stay. Technical oversight, he called it in his reports to Earth Command. Ensuring long-term stability of the quantum matrix. In truth, he couldn't bear the thought of leaving. Not yet. Not when every day brought some new revelation, some fresh glimpse of the impossible. These equations suggest something remarkable, Naira said one evening, her scales shimmering with barely contained excitement. They sat in the observation dome, stars wheeling slowly overhead. The beings didn't just give us scientific knowledge. They showed us how reality itself thinks. Reality thinks? James leaned forward, fascinated not just by the concept but by the way Naira's eyes caught the starlight. Consider, what we perceive as physical laws, gravity, quantum mechanics, the flow of time, they're all expressions of a deeper consciousness. The universe isn't just alive, James. It's aware. And we're what? Its thoughts. Naira's head crest rippled thoughtfully. Perhaps its dreams. Or its questions. She turned to face him fully. Do you know what troubles me most about this discovery? That it challenges everything you thought you knew. That it makes me feel. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. Centaurians pride themselves on logic, on emotional distance. We believe it makes us better scientists, better observers of reality. But these beings, with their vast intelligence, their profound understanding of the cosmos, they reached out to us through pure emotion. Through longing. Through love. James's breath caught. In all their time working together, he'd never heard her use that word. Love isn't unscientific, he said carefully. It's chemistry, biology, quantum entanglement at its most fundamental level. Is that what this is? Naira's scales shifted to that soft rose color he'd seen only once before. Quantum entanglement. Before James could respond, the station's alarms screamed to life. The quantum core's readings were spiking again, but differently this time. Violently. They raced to the control room, all personal revelations forgotten in the face of crisis. The dimensional bridge was destabilizing, reality rippling like water in a storm. Something's wrong, Naira's fingers flew across the controls. The bridge, it's being forced open from the other side. But not by our friends. James studied the readings with growing horror. These patterns, they're completely different. Aggressive. There are others out there, Naira confirmed grimly. Less benevolent entities. Our communication must have attracted their attention. The station shuddered as another wave of quantum energy crashed through the bridge. Warning lights flashed across every console. We have to shut it down, James said. Sever the connection completely. If we do that, we'll lose everything. All their knowledge, all their. Better to lose knowledge than lives. James gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Naira, please. I can't lose you to this. She stared at him, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the chaos of the quantum storm. For a moment, he thought she would pull away, retreat behind her wall of Centaurian logic. Instead, she pressed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. Then we do it together, she said. But not by running away. By understanding. Before he could stop her, she was moving toward the quantum core chamber. The hostile entities are using our bridge, but they don't understand how we built it. How we aligned our consciousness with the beings who helped us. What are you suggesting? The bridge was built on connection, on shared understanding. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. To close it properly, we need the same thing. Perfect synchronization. Perfect trust. Like before, James said, understanding dawning. But this time we both go in. She held out her hand. Together. James took it without hesitation, her scales cool and smooth against his skin. Together. As they stepped into the quantum core chamber, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The hostile entities pressed against the dimensional barriers, their presence a discord in the universal symphony. But in that moment, standing side by side, human and Centaurian faced the storm as one. Ready? James asked softly. Naira's scales rippled with every color he'd ever seen her wear, the deep violet of focus, the indigo of intellectual excitement, the rose of awakening feelings, and something new, a brilliant, incandescent gold. With you? She squeezed his hand. Always. Beyond the event horizon. The quantum core chamber blazed with impossible light as James and Naira stood at the heart of the storm. Reality twisted around them, the hostile entities hammering against the dimensional walls with increasing fury. But in that moment of crisis, something extraordinary was happening. Their joined consciousness, human intuition and Centaurian logic intertwined, began to resonate with the quantum bridge itself. Through their connection, they could see the structure of reality laid bare, not just as mathematical equations, but as a living, breathing tapestry of possibility. Do you see it? Naira's voice was filled with wonder. The pattern within patterns. I see you, James replied softly. I see everything. Their shared awareness expanded, touching the edges of the universe itself. They felt the benevolent beings who had first contacted them, their ancient wisdom reaching across the void. And they felt the others, the dark entities trying to break through, their hunger for conquest rolling off them in waves of distorted quantum energy. They're trying to corrupt the bridge, Naira observed, her scientific mind working even as their consciousness merged. Converting its harmonic frequency into something destructive. Then we changed the song, James said. He didn't know how he knew what to do, only that the knowledge was there, flowing between them like light between stars. Together, they began to move. Not just physically, but on every level of reality. Their movements traced complex patterns in space-time, each gesture precisely calculated yet flowing like dance. The quantum bridge responded to their unified will, its structure shifting, transforming. The hostile entities redoubled their assault, sensing what they were attempting. The station groaned under the quantum stress, systems failing one by one. Warning klaxons blared in the distance, but they seemed to come from another universe entirely. Station hull integrity at 20%, the computer announced dispassionately. Quantum containment failing. James. Naira's scales were shifting through colors he'd never seen before, some that possibly hadn't existed until this moment. If this doesn't work, it'll work. He met her gaze, seeing in her multifaceted eyes the same certainty he felt in his soul. Because this? Us? It's bigger than physics. Bigger than logic or emotion or the space between species. This is evolution. Understanding flowed between them. They weren't just closing a bridge, they were building something new. A fusion of human and Centaurian, of intuition and logic, of heart and mind. The hostile entities fought against it, but they couldn't comprehend what they were fighting. Their consciousness was singular, isolated. Alone. James and Naira were anything but alone. With a final, perfect synchronization of thought and movement, they completed the transformation. The quantum bridge didn't so much close as transcend, its energy redistributing across multiple dimensions in a cascade of light and mathematics. The hostile entities found themselves caught in a maze of their own understanding, their aggression turned back upon itself. The station shuddered one final time, then fell silent. Emergency systems hummed back to life. Through the observation windows, the stars shone with renewed clarity. Slowly, their shared consciousness began to separate, each returning to their individual awareness. But something remained, a connection deeper than physics, more permanent than memory. Did we? James had to catch his breath. Did we just rewrite the laws of quantum mechanics? No, Naira replied, her voice holding a warmth he'd never heard before. We proved them. Connection, James. It's the fundamental force of the universe. Not gravity, not electromagnetism. Connection. Your people won't like that conclusion, he said with a small smile. It's not very logical. My people, Naira said carefully, her scales settling into that beautiful rose color he'd come to cherish, will need to expand their definition of logic. She reached up, touching his face with infinite gentleness. As I have. Does this mean you'll admit we make a good team? I will admit, she said with what was definitely a smile, that some equations require both variables to be complete. Above them, through the quantum core's stabilized matrix, they could still sense the benevolent beings. Not communicating now, but watching. Witnessing. Perhaps, James thought, they had known all along what would happen. Perhaps this too was part of the universe's endless dance of discovery and connection. The station will need extensive repairs, Naira observed, her practical nature reasserting itself even as her hand found his again. Good thing you've got a human emergency specialist on staff, James replied. Permanently, if you'll have me. Naira's scales rippled with that new golden color, the one he now recognized as joy. I believe, she said softly, that would be the most logical arrangement. As they stood together in the quantum core chamber, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, a little clearer. Reality itself had changed, not just around them but within them. And in that change, in that impossible space between what was and what could be, they had found something greater than either of them had ever imagined. They had found truth.